Good morning. Welcome to the Eastman Financial Report. I'm Dan Eastman, your host, and today is Friday, January 23rd, 2026. Oh, it's amazing how quickly these months and years go by, and here we are already at the end of January. And of course, we avoided the next government shutdown by passing legislation that I'll talk about at the federal level that perpetuates the $2.5 trillion deficit. But anyway, thank you for tuning in. As always, we appreciate your viewership here at the Eastman Financial Report, as well as throughout the day on all of the amazing programming you see here on Worldview Tube, and of course here at Worldview Radio. As you know, we are a Christian broadcasting network, and it is our ministry, our mission, our passion, our goal, and our desire to bring to the great marketplace of ideas the information of the day, the news and information of the day from a Christian perspective. And as I often mention and I often talk about, the global marketplace of ideas is an ever expanding marketplace as modern technology has destroyed the monopoly that the old fashioned propaganda media has had since the 1940s and probably since the 1920s with the advent of radio. But today, broadcasting is an amazingly efficient thing, and it's democratized, small d, democracy, democratized, in that all sorts of people can pick up the Cobalt microphone. Or actually, this is sort of my trade thing, but anyone can pick up a microphone and start broadcasting and expressing their opinions to a global audience, because we're not constrained by radio waves traveling across the fruited plains. If you remember back in the olden days, if you had an AM radio and you were listening to your favorite rock station, you couldn't get too far from that tower before the signal faded out, and that was the end of it. Well, with the advent of television and broadcast and national networks, we were able to communicate from sea to shining sea, but it was always very expensive and very controlled by a very few people who had the microphones, and that allowed them to pretty much create the mental content that people lived in the United States believing, and it was a culturally homogenizing thing. Well, today we don't have that, of course, with digital broadcast and independent broadcasters such as ourselves. We're not beholden to any specific secret power group that wants us to come on the air and say things. No, we speak our opinions and we speak our mind. And that's the beautiful thing about the independent media that you see all across the internet. And certainly worldviewtube.com is a great leader in that space. We've been broadcasting this message since 2006. We're not new to this space. This is something we've been doing for a very long time. And frankly, when you think about it geographically, worldviewtube.com, in essence, perhaps got its start in the city of Milwaukee with the old CVY broadcasting network, Rick Elias, Lord rest his soul. But this has been going on a long time. So when we broadcast in this space as Worldview Tube and Worldview Radio, we are broadcasting from a position of experience and a trusted source of information that has survived the test of time. But we're an independent broadcast network. And that's why it's so important that we have a Christian microphone and bringing a Christian perspective to this ever-expanding marketplace of ideas. And we do that every day. If you'd like to help us do that, you can help us do that by going to worldviewfoundation.com and making a donation. And that helps us keep this content alive and fresh and free of charge. As you know, you're not paying a paywall to see me broadcast right now or a subscription price. It's freely given, just like the gospel 2,000 years ago when the apostles spread the good news of the gospel throughout the Middle East. They weren't charging an admission fee, or that wasn't entertainment. No, that was a gift freely given. And here we are 2,000 years later, continuing to give this gift freely into that ever-expanding marketplace of ideas where people are clamoring for this type of information as an alternative to the processed canned media that they've been watching for the last 50 to 60 years. That's why what we do is important. And you can help us in that ministry. So go to worldviewfoundation.com and make a donation. You make a one-time donation, very helpful. Or you can sign up for monthly donations, and that is the benefit of flattening our revenue curve a bit so we can better match our costs to revenues and keep our bottom line positive and keep broadcasting for free. The address is on the bottom of the screen. You can go to wvwfoundation.com or worldviewfoundation.com, or you can use the handy QR code. Swipe that with your cell phone, and it'll take you right to the website. You can make a donation. You can also help this ministry by doing business with the vendors you see advertising throughout the day on our networks. We don't sell blocks of advertising time. We're not a commercial broadcasting network from that perspective, but we do partner with companies we know and trust so that when you do business with them, you know that a small portion of the proceeds comes back to us in the form of a commission, and that also keeps us on the air, online, and live. And you're doing business with some very great companies, so that helps us when you do business and use those promo codes. That's what that's all about. The third way you can help, and this is important because there's a spiritual component as well, is Brandon House has been active in this ministry since, well, before 2006, but it came together, and he's written 15 books, and he's been broadcasting and doing events and conferences, seminars for over 20 years. All of that content is now digital, and it lives within a new product called The Vault. So if you go to worldviewtube.com/vault, you can subscribe. There's a little paywall there, but you will be subscribing to on-demand content that is spiritually uplifting and very, very relevant. So if you're struggling with your spiritual position at the moment, or you just, like most of us, are down in the dumps in January after the holiday season, subscribing to The Vault is a wonderful treasure that you can treat yourself to. So you have 24/7 on-demand access to amazing spiritual content, really solid Christian material, and it will be of benefit to you when you're feeling like you really need a little bump in the in your spiritual situation. That is a great product to do. Now, we know we open the scriptures and God speaks to us through the scriptures, and that is first and foremost where you should go for spiritual enhancement. But if you want to be part of a bigger fellowship, this bigger ministry that we have here at worldviewtube.com and WVWTV, you can subscribe to The Vault. That's a nice treasure to have in your pocket as well. And keep in mind, if you have friends or family or relatives that are struggling spiritually, we like to think, what can I do for that person? How can I help that person? Well, buying them a subscription to The Vault may be just the ticket, because when they're struggling and they can log in and on-demand access to this wonderful collection of Christian material, that's a really important gift. And you can help somebody who's struggling in life by just getting them a subscription. It's a wonderful gift to give, because it's 12 months. It's not something you give them and they use up or they throw away, whatever, lose it. This is something they can use throughout the year to really, really help them through their spiritual journey. And I think that's something that I'm thinking about. There are some people that would really benefit, and that's a great way for you to give to them. How do I help them? Well, give them a subscription to The Vault. That would be something that will really be a valued treasure. Also in The Vault, there are the Eastman Financial Report reruns. So if you'd like to look at my work, criticize my work, whatever you'd like to do, subscribe to The Vault, pay the money, it's the economics, and then you can review my materials, and then you can come on the show and we can debate. We love to do that, because economics is not only the dismal science, but it is a traditional science, social science. It's been around for 2,500 plus years, probably since creation. And we still don't know how to manage an economy. We talk about it a lot. We come up with some great ideas, some wonderful formulas, and lots of econometrics. But at the end of the day, it's still opinion. And that's the beautiful thing. So, okay, that's how you can help us out. Make a donation and do business with the vendors you see advertising. And be sure to subscribe to The Vault. It's a real treasure. Okay, let's talk about the news. And I guess I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the weather. This is not the weather program, but sometimes the weather does impact the economy. And what we're seeing, and I'm not a weather meteorologist, but from what I'm understanding is that we have a convergence not only of super cold air, which right now it's -13 in Milwaukee, which for us is cold. Yes, I will all admit that's very cold, but it's not all that unusual in December, January, and even February for us up here in the north to be seeing daytime highs in the negative numbers. It sort of comes with the territory. If you choose to live in these parts, then you have to take the weather as it comes. But for the rest of the country, this starts to become a real issue, because we're used to moving snow up here and living in the Arctic Circle as it moves southward. We have Lambeau Field in Green Bay, which of course is the home of the Ice Bowl back in 1963, I think it was. We're sort of used to moving snow around and being cold half the year, but a lot of the country isn't. And this creates some interesting economic situations, not as well as public safety situations. If you're blessed to be able to live south of the Mason-Dixon or anywhere south of Illinois, your winters are cool and mild, and the leaves fall off the trees, of course. But the idea of sub-zero temperatures becomes a really scary thing because you're not prepared for that. The infrastructure isn't built to handle that. And then when you think of the Gulf moisture coming up, according to my meteorologist friends, and it hits that super duper cold air and it dumps this massive load of snow in an area that usually doesn't see a lot of snow every decade, that starts to become a public safety issue because it stalls transportation and people, it might be fun to throw a snowball or two, but when you start to think about it, with cold temperatures and bad weather, your life depends upon electricity. You're watching me right now, and your computer is plugged into the wall. Maybe you're watching it on your battery charged. It's electrons that are moving. And if the power grid, is disabled because of the weather, that can become a very life-threatening situation for a lot of people. Now, there's all sorts of backups and redundancies and emergency generators and all of the things that people do to try to keep the electrons flowing. But what it does do is it demonstrates the fragility of how fragile the American economy is and how very, very dependent it is on electricity. Because, as you know, we not only heat our homes and illuminate our homes, or maybe perhaps cool our homes in the South with electricity, but electricity really drives the economy as well. More and more and more transactions are happening digitally. People pay by their phone or with cards or whatever. The idea of pulling dollar bills out of your pocket or coins is becoming sort of an anachronism, sort of a quaint leftover from yesteryear. The problem with that is when the power becomes unstable due to natural phenomena, and it could be a big snowstorm or perhaps tornadoes or maybe a hurricane or an earthquake, whatever, or flooding, even in the flooding situation we saw horrifically in the mountains last year, what you end up with is a more fragile economy and that has some not only economic impact, but also life-threatening impact as well. So one of the things I'm going to be watching with this storm is the integrity of the power grid. But more importantly, and I talked about this yesterday on my show briefly, more and more of Americans are heating their homes with natural gas because natural gas is a very abundant resource. Back in the olden days of the 1970s, we thought there were some dead dinosaurs rotting away under the ground, and if we just, release the gas and the oil, we could use that for a while. Well, we've kind of putting the old dinosaur days theory behind because we've been pumping oil and gas like crazy for decades now. And the point is, from the earth comes natural gas, and natural gas is not something that takes millions of years to create. Okay, anybody, you can make natural gas a lot quicker than that. And basically, what it is the decomposition of organic material breaks down into methane and other gases, CO2 and methane, and it's methane that is natural gas. It's a CH4 molecule. There's one molecule of carbon, one atom of carbon, and four atoms of hydrogen, and that's methane, CH4. And it burns. It doesn't explode. It burns. Well, if you compress it, it'll explode. But the point is, this is what we use more and more across the United States to heat homes and businesses, hospitals, buildings, whatever. And all of that natural gas, for the most part, is centered geographically. Like the Permian Basin west of Dallas and Fort Worth is a lot of gas down there. There must have been a lot of dinosaurs back in the olden days. But natural gas is a big product exported from Canada south. And of course, throughout the Appalachian Mountains and other regions of the United States, there are huge beds of natural gas, which is created from organic material that is decomposing. So maybe it's more than just dinosaurs. It might be whatever. But the point is, natural gas moves around and it's pumped. And in order to run the pumps, you need electricity. So if the electricity isn't on, then the system becomes, well, there's redundancy built in to keep gas moving, but it's a much more complicated process. So what you end up with is it comes right back to this idea that the American economy, the modern global economy, is run at 60 cycles per second on electrons. And if those electrons aren't moving, that's a problem. So that's why when we look at, these big stormy days, it's cloudy outside and all the rest of this stuff, Solar and wind aren't really helpful at this point. What you need to do is move a lot of base load. And why this is relevant is because as we build more and more of these data centers, we're building one right up the road here from my office, they take so much electricity to run. And like I mentioned yesterday on my program, that the data center they're building in my little county up here is takes more electricity than all the homes in Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a big place. There's millions of homes in Wisconsin, but that one plant takes more electricity. So when we get to a weather phenomenon like this, and you think about how an electric utility manages its generation, they generate electricity, they transmit electricity, and they distribute. It's the three major functions of a vertically integrated monopoly electric utility. When the weather events like this happen and you have to start shedding load, or through wind and trees and lines get knocked down, whatever, there's a hierarchy that is regulated that requires utilities to start shutting off customers. And you can have big interruptible factories that have given notice and they'll shut down, and that buys you a lot of capacity. But in an emergency situation, and this is important to understand, that residential homes and small businesses get cut first. Data centers will be last, right along with hospitals and nursing homes. There's a hierarchy, but these data centers, you can't turn them on, turn them off. You can't just shut it down and shed load, because it will do extraordinary damage to the internet, just like we saw yesterday with that Microsoft outage. It was quite an interesting thing. I was trying to file some court records, and lo and behold, I couldn't perform my lawyerly duty because the codes weren't coming. I thought that was fascinating to me, that the courts are so dependent on one company, and when they have a glitch, the court system kind of stopped. Now it's back up running today, but wow, it's an interesting problem. Well, the bigger problem, of course, is with electricity and electric generation, because we generate big amounts here, we transmit big amounts, and we distribute in small amounts. This becomes a distribution problem. And when you see a big weather event like we're seeing today, that is going to be more and more of a disruption as you have more and more of these data centers running on the grid. So it's an interesting thing to watch. Well, anyway, if you live in the South, be careful, to be prudent. If you live in the North, well, I guess we'll all be sitting here in 13 below zero watching the show, but certainly something to watch from an economic perspective. Let's take a break here. I will come back and I want to talk about some of the news. Lots of news today. I'll be right back. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Would you like to gain access to over 20 years of my radio shows, TV shows, my books? I've written 15 books, and most of those books are ebooks now. And we have conference DVDs, conferences where we filmed our conferences at the Ozarks, literally starting 20 years ago. It's all available in our archived vault. All you have to do is go to worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and for a reasonable monthly fee, you gain access to over 20 years of Christian worldview programming, news, information, books, documentaries, and a powerful search engine. And folks, it's a great way not only to educate yourself, equip yourself, but it's a big way that you can help fund our continuation as a broadcast network. Please check it out. worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and help us continue pushing out a Christian worldview.
Okay, I'm back, and I want to talk about some of the other news. One of the big stories today, and this is sort of historic. Well, it is historic. It's not sort of, it is. Gold has touched $5,000 an ounce, and silver, amazingly, has touched $100 an ounce. It's bouncing around a little bit because whenever gold and silver hits a historic high, there's a lot of sell pressure in demand. Demand is fixed, supply appears, people start selling, and then there's more supply than demand. The price comes back down a little bit, but it's a big thing to notice, because the precious metals market has always been more of an esoteric investment space, and of course have been gold bugs and silver bugs forever. And of course, I've spent academic time, thinking about hard money and specie being money that's made of gold and silver. There's always a human demand for those two elements, and we're seeing that in an environment, excuse me, in an environment where the national economy is struggling, and our American economy is struggling because of the 38.5 trillion in debt and the 2.5 trillion dollar annual deficit that Congress just cannot help itself. It just continues to spend more money than it has. And as a result of that, when you're looking at why would you own gold and why would you own silver? I guess if you look at John Maynard Keynes, he called it the barbarous relics. These are relics from the days of old where gold and silver coins ruled the day. But apparently, while it may have been barbarous to the late John Maynard Keynes, there's still a lot of demand for those precious metals as an alternative. And that's why it takes so many more American dollars today to buy these two metals than it did in yesteryear. Now, if you think about it, I started broadcasting in March of 2023. It's almost 3 years ago. And at that time, gold was $1,805 an ounce. And one of my early programs, if you subscribe to the Vault and go back and look, you'll see my question was, can gold go to $2,000, which would have been a record? It would have been the highest price ever. And could it possibly do that? Could it take 2,000 paper dollar bills to buy one little ounce of gold coin? Well, the answer is yes. Now it takes you 5,000 pieces of paper to buy the same size 1 ounce gold coin. The paper didn't get any smaller and the gold coins didn't get any smaller. It's 1 ounce of gold. It now takes 5,000 American dollars to buy an ounce, when 3 years ago it took $1,805. Now you think, boy, if I had only bought gold back 3 years ago, I'd be set. Well, that's speculation, and that's the way the markets are. And keep in mind, if you go to any of the gold sites, we have gold merchants who advertise on our network. Go to their site, take a look. And look at the historic line. If you can go out 10 years or 5 years, whatever their graph allows you to do. And what you'll realize is that it wiggles, okay? It wiggles, it goes up and it goes down, and wiggles up and down and up and down. And that's what markets do. It doesn't matter if it's gold or silver or pork bellies or, I don't know, pick a stock, RCA stock, whatever stock. Stocks go up, stocks go down, anything that trades in a marketplace. And it depends upon the supply of the number of units available for trade and the demand for that. Right now, the demand for gold and silver is quite high. And of course, I get calls all the time. Should I be buying gold? And I don't give financial advice. I don't give investment advice at all. My canned response from being the former commissioner of securities regulating this market or these markets was that trees don't grow to the sky. They don't grow to the sky. You can't, if you want to make money on Wall Street, I guess you have to buy low and sell high. If you buy high and sell low, then you lose money. It's something you have to do your own homework. And I guess it would really depend upon your belief in the system and how much higher can gold go and silver go in terms of dollars, monetized in terms of dollars, not Japanese yen, not euros, but in dollars or Swiss francs, whatever you're nominating it in. So that's for you to do your homework and decide. But from the macroeconomic perspective, it's very interesting to see that in 3 years we've seen a deterioration in the value of the dollar as it is priced against gold and silver, and it's quite a spectacular run up. And it suggests that there's a lot less confidence in the future of the American dollar because of inflation, and that all goes back to that $38.5 trillion in national debt we've accumulated, and that 2 trillion plus deficit they run every year. And of course, if you were listening to the show in December, I was talking about that we had, so this is ancient history now, but the federal government of the United States shut down for 43 days, even though they didn't shut down. It never shuts down. You can't turn that thing off. But the point is, the news story, the silver minnow that swam across that everybody was supposed to grab, said that the government was shut down for 43 days. Well, then, of course, they passed continuing resolutions to kick the can to January 30th, which is 7 days from now. And that was the story. They wanted to kick it past the holidays because they were fooling around with travel during things. It's always Thanksgiving travel and Christmas season travel. Well, they kicked the can to the 30th, but now they've passed. At least the House has passed a bill, and it's a continuing bill. It's a spending resolution, and it's got all sorts of junk in it that nobody wanted. And of course, they continue to fund these fraud programs, sort of like the Minnesota fraud situation, because they just simply cannot help themselves. There is no idea that you start with a fresh piece of paper, zero-based budgeting, and you start over and you think, even for one small agency, if you could just start over for one agency and say, okay, let's revisit what is the goal, what is the mission, what's the ministry of this agency, and how much money does it really take, and is the rent too high, is it, it's payroll stuffed with people who don't show up, and all the typical corruption. They don't do that. They just keep pushing more and more and more money. And when you talk to your congressional representative, I have a Republican representative, he's a great guy, he's a dear friend, an old friend. But I tell you, it's like being in an avalanche or a landslide when you're in Congress. Once the earth or the snow lets go, you're down. And you can either not vote or you can vote, and when you come back to the district and you start talking to people, a lot of people aren't really paying attention to the deficit issue, but they are certainly paying attention to those federal dollars because we need those federal dollars here. And that's the conundrum we have. So there's no break or mechanism that ever keeps Congress within the spending bounds. Like our households or businesses, you can't spend more money than you make forever and not have financial crisis in your life, but the federal government can, and that's the big problem. So we'll watch to see how this is going to shape up. And the government, and there's nobody talking about the government shutting down on January 30th, but what they're passing is very disappointing from a conservative perspective because it continues to be it's billions. This isn't just $100 for this, $100. It's billions of dollars in wasteful spending that's unfair. You tax hard-working taxpayers, and you give the money to people who are not hard-working taxpayers, and it's a forced transfer payment. Now you say, well, we should be a charitable society. But charity starts with the wallet you're sitting on in your chair or the purse sitting next to your chair. The charity starts with your funds, not saying, I'm a charitable person and a generous person, so therefore I'll vote to use taxpayer money to support this cause. That's not charity. It's very easy to give away other people's property and feel good about it. First you steal it from them, and then you get over that, and then you go and give it to somebody in need. Well, that apparently erases the sin of stealing because you gave the ill-gotten gains to someone in need. Now, of course, our tax dollars are not ill-gotten gains; they're required by law. We have a voluntary tax system in the United States, and you voluntarily pay your taxes. And if you don't voluntarily pay your taxes, you're going to voluntarily go to jail. It's voluntary, but that's the point. It's very easy to give other people's money away and feel good about yourself. Come on, I spent this money on this, and I voted for this, and I voted for that. But, other than paying their own taxes, which you have to imagine if you're in Congress, I mean, it would seem that if you can go from zero net worth to 30 million in net worth in 4 years, just think of the taxes they pay. Do they pay taxes? It'd be interesting to know. Anyway, that's the that's the problem. But we look at the University of Michigan survey today. It came out, and there's a sliver of good news here that the University of Michigan survey tests the sentiment of the people on the street. And what we're seeing is that they still expect 4% inflation, and I think that's reflected in the gold and silver prices. That there's an inherent sense that we are going to be living with inflation for a very long time, and that is showing up in the sentiment. And it's an interesting thing. But remember, that was the survey where the Democrats thought inflation would be like 8%, and the Republicans thought it'd be 1%. Well, the good news is that the Democrats are coming around to realize that it's closer to 4%, which is a very accurate number. If we look at the consumer price index and the consumer product index, the CPE that we looked at yesterday, coming in at 2.8, and the consumer price index at 2.7, 2.8, we're seeing at least government statistical numbers that suggest inflation's under 3%. The public sentiment is approaching 4%. And I guess all of us, when we look at our experiences at the grocery store, maybe we're sensing something else. But again, that survey is pointing to where people are psychologically in our economy. And that, again, supports the question, why is gold $5,000 an ounce? Because people really have an inherent sense of self-protection. And you realize that given this massive national deficit, $38.5 trillion, and or debt, and then the deficit's running at $2+ trillion a year, and not fixing it, not even talking about balanced budget, that inflation is a thing that will be here for a very, very long time, and that's going to show itself. In some serious problems over time. Well, I'm out of time for today. We'll see what the weather happens over the weekend. I'll be back broadcasting next week. I want to talk about the Japan situation. And also, I want to be taking a deeper dive into the Minnesota situation to figure out how in the world you can get federal tax dollars allocated through a state government into a county government, into NGOs, and then billions of dollars are stolen. It's remarkable. I want to start to dissect that mechanics so people have a better understanding of how dollars actually flow through governments and how could this happen? Well, we're going to get to that. How does this happen? I talked last week about how do you convert it into paper money? Well, now we're going to talk about how do you position that so that you can rip off the state government, rip those federal dollars. We're going to find out. Anyway, have a great weekend. Be safe. If you're in the South, stay warm, and appreciate your viewership. Be sure to donate at the worldviewfoundation.com to keep us going, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.